One of the things that I was also talking to Cadence about this week, he made this observation, my 6-year-old. He said, there are a lot of couples around. Like, really, there are these days. I mean, you used to be a church full of single people, with a couple married couples. And now there's like all these couples. And so I started to think about the new people that we've had come around, or the people that we've had around that have gotten together. And it's awesome to see kind of like relationships or all the buzz. And so he was asking me all these questions about you guys and trying to wrap his head around why anybody would really want to do that. Be in a relationship forever. I'm like, Mommy and Daddy, see, we love each other. He's like, okay. Can I go play my Kindle? I'm like, yeah, it's not connecting. But the way we think about love in the U.S. and in the West in general, and, it's becoming more common. So now in a lot of other countries, too, that never thought about love the way we do, they're starting to, because the West sort of takes over, our culture and the way that we think. And the way we think about relationships and even marriage is so far removed from the way this has been done in so many generations in so many different countries. It's hard sometimes for us to remember that feeling love first and then entering into a commitment is a relatively new practice. Okay? And throughout most of history, people have made a commitment and learned to love over time in lots of different cultures and things. And I know things like arranged marriages sound so strange to us, because what if you don't love them? They never have thought about love in that way. Eric and I sat down with some international students at it was a Chi Alpha thing years and years and years ago, and we were talking about dating, which really we were talking about courting, which really we were talking about being friends and getting engaged, which is what we did. So we were basically there to convince them to do it this way. And at the end, a very large group, probably a third of the students raised their hands and said, you guys didn't talk about arranged marriages and how to make that work. And we're like, right. Because we're in the U.S. and we figure everybody has freedom to do what they want here, and they're like, we do. And we want to have an arranged marriage. And it totally threw us for a loop, because we couldn't wrap our heads around someone else, making that call for us. And we said, why? Explain, what the value of this is. And they said, well, our parents know us. They love us. They're investing in their future as much as ours, which we don't have a concept of in the U.S., generational legacies. We don't think of it the same way they do. So they said they're not going to choose someone for us who's going to be bad for us. They're not going to choose someone's extended family who's going to be bad to be a part of our extended family. They're going to choose the right person for us, and then we're going to learn to love them over time. And we're like, next time maybe you should teach this particular session, because it sounds like you kind of got a handle on what commitment is. So just want to show you a kind of a funny clip from a movie, a musical called Fiddler on the Roof. All right? Because it kind of gives a picture of the difference in the way we think of love. And right here in this clip, Tavia and Golda are struggling with love because their daughters are getting married to people, and their oldest daughter has said, we love each other. And they've never considered the concept that you would love somebody before you enter a covenant relationship. And so they're kind of trying to wrap their heads around this. So they're Jews in Russia, so that's why their clothes look funny. And it's a musical, so they're going to sing.
Do you love me?
Do I what?
Do you love me?
Do I love you?
Well,
with our daughters getting married and there's trouble in the town, you're upset, you're worn out, go inside, go lie down. Maybe it's indigestion.
No, Golda, I'm asking you a question. Do you love me?
You're a fool.
I know. But do you love me?
Do I love you?
Well,
for 25 years I've washed your clothes, cooked your meals, cleaned your house, given you children, milked your cow. After 25 years, why talk about love right now?
Golda, the first time I met you was on our wedding day. I was scared.
I was shy.
I was nervous.
So was I.
But my father and my mother said we'd learn to love each other. And now I'm asking, Golda, do you love me?
I'm your wife.
I know. But do you love me?
Do I love him?
Well,
for 25 years I've lived with him, fought with him, starved with him. 25 years my bed is his. If that's not love, what is?
And you love me.
I suppose I do.
And I suppose I love you too. It doesn't change a thing, but even so, after 25 years, it's nice to know.
After 25 years, it's just a nice thing to know that you love me, right? So think about how different this way of thinking about love is. That it's, what is love? I mean, she's asking, like, what does that mean, other than me being committed to you and being your wife, acting like your wife in every way that there is. It's a little foreign to us. I think all the time how spoiled I am. I am so spoiled. I'm like, I want Eric to like love me and show me love and according to my love language and according to every like little individual thing that I need all the time. And I think my grandparents who died in their 90s, who knows how many times they said, I love you in those ways, but they knew it their whole lives. My grandfather died a few weeks after my grandmother. Everybody knew that was what was going to happen. They took care of each other. They loved each other. There's no doubt that happened because they built that over years and years and years. We don't start with love and it fades. We start with a little bit and it grows, right? According to our commitment to each other. And that is, unfortunately, in our world today, marriage is the only symbol that we really have of covenant. So it's really hard for us to understand covenants other than looking at marriage. But the reason I show you that clip is because even our understanding of marriage is a little wonky according to how people would have thought about it back in these days when we're talking about covenant. Covenant is about committing yourself to this other person forever. You do not break it. There is no reason to walk away from it. That's just the way covenants were in this day. So we're going to look at it. Tonight I want to look at the first covenant and the second covenant. Now, covenant is a very powerful word. I hang out with people all the time, but I don't say, like, we have covenanted to have coffee tomorrow. You know what I'm saying? Like, you kind of reserve covenant for very serious, intense situations. Like, you and I, we mean something to each other, and we are going to be by each other's side. And so we want to look at the full extent of that by looking at Abraham's life. I know we talked about him a little bit last week, but I want to dive a little bit more into Genesis 15. First, I want to remind you, as we're talking about covenants, that there are two sides to this Christian life. It's like DNA with the double, what is it called? Helix. Okay, so one strand of that is covenant and the other strand is kingdom. Tonight we're really focusing on covenant, but we need to remember that kingdom is a huge, huge part of it. You can't just have one without the other and have the DNA of a real Christian life. So whereas covenant is about being, kingdom is about doing. Remember, covenant is all about identity. So the person that I am, and I just need to be that person. But that's not enough to really have the full picture of a Christian life. We also have to do things, right? So a disciple is someone who does the things Jesus did for the reasons he did them. So we have to have the reasons down, which is the covenant part. But we also have to do the things Jesus did, right? A lot of the Bible is filled with instructions of what to do and not do. Doing is important. It's just not where we draw our identity. Okay, covenant is always where we get our identity, not kingdom. Covenant is about relationship. And kingdom is about responsibility. So our relationship with God is what tells us who we are. We're kids of His, and we're never going to stop being that. No matter how I behave today, I would hope that I can behave today like a child of God, like the amazing God that He is, that people would look at me and say, that looks like someone who must have some sort of relationship with God. But if I don't in a given time, I'm no less His child. I am that because of my relationship with Him, not because of what I'm doing. However, with being a child comes the responsibility of behaving like one. And again, we don't see this in our culture, but you look at stories like the prodigal son, and you see the way a son or a daughter behaved reflected a lot on the father and on the mother in a family. We just don't really have a concept of that anymore because everybody has so much individual kind of freedom in our culture that we forget. We bring shame to our family, we bring honor to our family, and that's what we do through our responsibilities. Covenant is about the table. and kingdom is about the task. So the table is big enough for everybody. The table is where we get fed. It's where we feel at home. It's where we're given hospitality. There's more and more room at the table, right? There's more and more room in the family. This is an awesome family. We need to make room for more, right? Very inclusive, very inviting. The task is where we sit down, we eat our fill, we get really encouraged, and we say, oh, look at that. 96% of our county doesn't know Christ. Let's go do something. So that's the kingdom side of things. The covenant side is that God is Father. And the kingdom side is that God is King. It's sort of like when a little kid gets to snuggle up to his dad all the time and see how awesome he is and eats breakfast with them and are spelling out things in their, Cheerios or whatever. And then it's bring your kid to work day and they go and realize their dad runs the show in a really massive way and is kind of awesome. That's the God that we serve. He's our Father. In fact, if you want to use Jesus' words in Matthew 6, where he starts off the Lord's Prayer, he says, Abba, which in Aramaic literally means daddy. We like to say Father. That's not what it means. It means daddy. That's as intimate a term as he could use to talk about relationship as God as Father. And then right after that he says, holy is your name. God is King. Like in one sentence, you get covenant and kingdom. You see this all the time in the Bible. God is a genius at showing us the reflections of these things all along. He's Father and he's King. And in covenant, we are his children. Whereas in kingdom, we are representatives of his kingdom. We're stewards, right? So when I think of myself in terms of covenant with God, it's the same things that I tell my children. I love you. I'm always going to love you. Nothing you ever do will make me love you less, It's true. It's so true. This is why you see mass murderers' mothers sitting in the back of a courtyard weeping and saying, but my boy would never do this. And you're like, your boy did, There's always that relationship there that they're never going to stop loving this person just because they did something horrible. God loves us like that. Like we are his children and nothing that we do is going to make him love us less. But we do want to represent his kingdom well, right? There is something about what we do. We show who he is. We show what his kingdom is like. And there are a lot of people out there who need to not just have us be, but have us do. So those are the two sides, covenant and kingdom. We're not talking about kingdom tonight, but I do want to remind you it's really important. Because when God entrusts things to us, and you can see shadows of it all over the place, he entrusts to us every capital that we have. He entrusts to us our children, our finances, our time, our emotional energy, all these things. And he says, I'm going to come back. I will entrust this to my steward. I'm the king, by the way. Me. This is God speaking, not me. I'm the king. I am going to come back and want to see what you did with the stuff I gave you, because it all belongs to me. So at the end of time, we will hand it back to him and say, here's what I did with all the stuff you entrusted to me. Because it was never ours. So we really want to make sure we never come to think of ourselves as that. We are stewards of what he gives us to take care of. We are loved because we're his children. So we might mess up everything he gives us to do. He's still going to love us. And that's kind of the message. We don't want to mess up everything. That would not be ideal. We do want people to see God through our lives, but he doesn't love us more or less because of how we do that. If identity gets stuck over in kingdom, which it does all the time, you see it all the time, because I haven't done the right things or I'm not good enough, or because I have done all the right things or I do think I'm good enough, I think differently about myself and my worth and value. If it goes over to the place, now kingdom stuff is kind of always changing, and it should. We're in different seasons. God gives us different roles. He gives us different responsibilities. Today I'm a pastor. Maybe next year he has me doing something completely different. That cannot control or define my identity, ever. I am not a pastor. That's just a role that I have. It's something that I do. It's a very big part of me. I wouldn't even go so far as to say, I'm a mother. That's who I am. No. God's entrusted. It's the biggest role that I have in my life. It's the most important one. But if that becomes who I am, what happens if that doesn't work out well? Then you have a bunch of parents sitting around saying, wow, I really need my kid to serve God. I really need my kid to be better. I really need my kid to do all the things that I want them to do, because all their identity is coming from those things. No matter what it is that we do, we don't find identity in those things. We find identity in that covenant stuff. So let's look at the first one that was created, the first covenant that we see in the Bible, which is in Genesis 15. So God does this crazy covenant thing with Abraham. So we're just going to read through this chapter. We'll pull out some stuff. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision. Now, this is before he changes his name to Abraham. It can get confusing, so when I refer to him, I'm just going to say Abraham, but in the scripture, we'll just read Abram. and said to him, "Do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you, and your reward will be great." But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son?" You hear that legacy thing? I don't hear Americans saying, "What good are all your blessings?" Because I don't have anybody to pass this on to. We are more than happy to use them up ourselves, right? But in this culture, you were nothing, really, if you didn't have children to pass it on to. Why was he accumulating? Abraham was very wealthy. Why was he accumulating all this stuff if there's no legacy, there's no family to pass it on to? "Since you've given me no children, Eliezer of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You've given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir." Then the Lord said to him, "No, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir." Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, "Look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have." And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. That is really interesting. Counted him as righteous, not because of perfection in him or even morality, but because of his faith. Then the Lord told him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as your possession." But Abram replied, "O sovereign Lord, how can I be sure that I will actually possess it?" Abraham is asking God how he can be sure that God is going to come through on his promise. Now this sounds crazy, right? How is he going to question God? Well, here's how. He doesn't have a covenant with him. He doesn't know him. He has no reason to trust. He must see him as pretty powerful because he already came in Genesis 12 and gave him the promise. An angel has shown up. Stuff is happening that is clearly miraculous. And yet, to Abraham, everything is about the relationship invested in making a covenant with someone. Why should he ever trust someone that he's not in covenant with? This is the way his mind would have been thinking. But the Lord told him, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer." And it's so funny because we just heard a message yesterday about this, and I've never heard anybody say this before, but she said, "Oh, that must have been music to Abraham's ears. Bring me a heifer." Okay, now for us, we're like, huh? Like what? That is bizarre. Because again, we're very far removed, thousands of years removed from this particular way of doing things. But Abraham was very familiar with how covenants were made. Very familiar with the fact that anybody who was just about to make a covenant would go find the most valuable thing you have and bring it here because we're going to sacrifice it. We're going to lay it down for each other. That's what it's going to cost us, but you're going to get a whole lot more out of it. So to Abraham to hear, "Bring me a heifer," he's like, woohoo! I think God is going to make a covenant with me, and this is going to be sweet. The best deal he has ever made and ever will is going to be with God. So he says, "Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." Just cover them all. All the different ones that we can use for every sacrifice that later on they institute. So Abram presented all these to him and killed them. Then he cut each animal down the middle. Sorry if this is graphic. This is the way they did things. And laid the halves side by side. He did not, however, cut the birds in half. Some vultures swooped down to eat the carcasses, but Abram chased them away. And this took a long time to do, okay? You're talking about hours and hours, probably super smelly. I mean, vultures they're supposed to eat dead things, so he's having to chase them away. It's yucky, okay? I can guarantee there's a little bit of blood around. And they line these things up. They lay them open so you can see their innards, basically, in a line to form this kind of corridor. This is how you made a covenant. As the sun was going down, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a terrifying darkness came down over him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "You can be sure that your descendants will be strangers in a foreign land, where they will be oppressed as slaves for 400 years. That's Egypt. But I will punish the nation that enslaves them, and in the end they will come away with great wealth. As for you, you will die in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. After 4 generations, your descendants will return here to this land, for the sins of the Amorites did not yet warrant their destruction." After the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw a smoking firepot and a flaming torch pass between the halves of the carcasses. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day and said, "I have given this land to your descendants, all the way from the border of Egypt to the great Euphrates River, the land now occupied by the Kenites, the Kenizzites, and all the ites." Okay, I won't bother going through all the ites. There's a lot of ites in these days. There's a whole lot happening here. So let me just remind you of a few things that are happening as they're making this covenant, God and Abraham. So again, when you are in a place in history and in time and in geography, like Abraham was in the day, there were no police officers, there was no one around to protect you, there were no real borders to anything. It was a very tribal culture. So you had no protection unless you had covenant with people. That was the form of your protection. And you guys know we've talked about oikos, extended family, and what that offered in the New Testament world. In the Old Testament world, provision and protection was what was offered through covenant. Provision and protection. What's mine is yours and what's yours is mine. We're going to provide for each other now. And I'm going to stand up and fight for you when someone comes after you. This is why we see the chapter before, when Lot is taken away, Abraham goes and fights for him, right? He's in covenant with his family. That's a given. Now, he may not have known how to fight. He wasn't necessarily told by God as far as we know. It's just like, hey, if somebody that you're in a covenant with is being attacked, you go and help. This is unfortunately another thing that we've lost in our culture. We have no idea how to fight for each other anymore. Hardly do even spouses know how to do that, much less outside of that, and extended family and friendships and things like that. Wow, you're really down. I mean, you see the church kind of tries to reinstitute this. Jesus tries to say, hey, if one of you is suffering, all of you are suffering. Help. But it really always comes back to this sense of covenant. When we have covenant with someone, we provide for them, we protect for them. Even if it's not my job, it is your job. It was Abraham's job. Now, usually when it happens, when a covenant is formed, it's initiated by the more powerful party. So sometimes it's like, I have a bunch of stuff. I don't need any more stuff, but what I need from you is protection. That's kind of what happened with Abraham and Melchizedek. The chapter before Melchizedek comes, he's a high priest and a prophet from Salem, and there is imagery about Jesus and through Melchizedek and foreshadowing and all this beautiful stuff happening all the way through the Bible. He comes and he makes a covenant with Abraham. So this is the first person covenant that we see, but it's probably happening all the time. And at the end of it, Abraham's like, thank you. This is going to help me out a lot because I'm going to go into an area and people are going to say, I'm not doing business with a stranger. How do I know you're going to hold up your end of the bargain? There's no way to go sue people. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is that guy's name? Frank Azar. Frank Azar, the strong arm. Like, those commercials are so horrible. There was none of that. Like, if you get taken by someone, you're just taken, you know? So they had to know somehow how to trust you. How did they know how to trust Abraham? They looked at his covenant partners. And Melchizedek was a very well-known, very respected one. And so when he wanted to form covenant with Abraham, he said, you know what I'll take? I'll take your credibility. Keep all your stuff. Because I don't want anybody to ever be able to say that somebody made me rich except God. So I don't want any of your stuff. I just want your name. When I go into a place, I'll tell them, you're my covenant partner. And they'll say, oh, if Melchizedek trusts you, I trust you too. You see, like the exchange of this. It was just a beautiful exchange of between partners. And some tiny shadow of that we still see in marriage. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine. I'll protect you. I'll provide for you. It's just not broad enough, right? This is why we put so much pressure on the institution of marriage to provide all of our needs from this one person because we have no extended family around anymore. And so this person has to be best friend, lover, has to have all the same hobbies I have, has to want to talk about everything that I want to talk about when I get home from work. I want to just, you can't understand the things I'm saying. Well, go talk about it to someone else in your extended family. You know what I'm saying? This is why marriages keep breaking up in America, partially, because that one person can't be everything. We don't know how to live in family anymore like that. So unfortunately, we don't get to see we don't have opportunities to be able to see covenant in very many places at all. And when we do see it, it's like way unbalanced, way too heavy. This is the way Abraham's world functioned. So for all these years, he knows what a covenant looks like. And the more important party initiates it, which in this case was God, which makes sense, right? And then they stand at opposite ends of this corridor, this bloody, nasty corridor. One on one end, the other on the other, and often they take their entire family through it, but it would start with the patriarch, or the most powerful person in the family. And as they're walking from one end to the other, they would trade places. And sometimes they would even say out loud, if I break this covenant, may what happened to these animals happen to me. Now, again, we have no sense of the severity of covenant very often because you start asking for stuff like that, and it doesn't matter how bad the choices are your covenant partner's making, you're going to stand up for them because that's the level of commitment they're making. And as they walk from one side to the other, they're basically saying, I'm exchanging everything with you now. It's no longer mine. I don't get to hold on to stuff and think this belongs to me anymore. It also belongs to my covenant partner. This is why when Goliath is trash-talking God, David stands up and he's like, no, you're not going to talk like that about my covenant partner. I mean, he never prays. At least we don't see in the Bible that David says, Lord, should I go fight a giant? He's just like enraged that nobody is doing anything. And his covenant partner is being talked trash about. He's not putting up with it. And guess what happens? His covenant partner, God, appreciates it and looks out for him. I'm sorry, I don't care how good the man is with the slingshot. You are not going to hit somebody in the forehead and have the stone sink into their head and kill them without some help from God. You know what I'm saying? I mean, temple maybe, or some other very vulnerable spot. God was helping him, right? Because covenant partners do that for each other. They just do it. They don't question, am I going to come out of this alive? They say, that is my partner. I need to engage. So these are all the things that are happening in this covenant. And we really have to catch on. The whole point of it... Somebody grab me some water. I'm sorry. I should have gotten some before. The whole point of it is to be in relationship with this person. So think about it this way. God did all of this to have a relationship with Abraham and with his people. We see him change his name. Thank you very much. He changes his name. He gives him a sign, which is circumcision, which I can guarantee you, or I can't, I guess, but probably wasn't the most pleasant thing to institute when he did. I'm not really sure how excited he was that was the sign of the covenant that he was supposed to institute, and yet God was like, oh, people are going to know you are even going to physically bear the mark of your covenant with me. He gives him, at some point, they're given the tabernacle and then the temple, and eventually a system of sacrifices to kind of keep this idea of covenant down. It is going to cost me my most valuable thing. Something that is 3 years old or older just means it's able to reproduce. So that costs a family a lot. Like, we have no idea of that. Right here in our heads, we're thinking, oh, a pigeon. No, it's specifically a heifer that could bear children at this point, which means it's really valuable to this family. Like, covenant always costs us something. Always. There's no way to create a covenant, and especially with God, where he doesn't say, go find the most important, valuable thing you have and sacrifice it in order to be my covenant partner. And it was so expected that we even see when he says to Abraham, sacrifice the son that I promised you, sacrifice the fulfillment of the promise. Abraham doesn't even think twice, because what's his belongs to God already. And what's God's belongs to him, because he wouldn't have anything that he had without God doing that stuff too. It's all about relationship. And we see it go all the way through the intertestamental period until we get to the New Testament, which is also in many Bibles, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but sometimes called the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. Until Jesus comes around and everybody is like, can we be done with this sacrifice business? Can we be done constantly sacrificing something for our sin so that there is bloodshed to pay for what I've done? I mean, there's a whole system of sacrifices that I will not go into. But the biggest one that many of us think about is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where the high priest of the entire nation was the only one allowed to go into the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place. You know, there's a holy place in the temple, and there's a most holy place. There's a very thick veil separating the holy place and the Holy of Holies, and only one man in an entire nation, the entire world, is allowed to go in there, and that's the high priest of the nation, and only one day a year, and he goes in there and atones for Israel's sin. And I heard a scholar say this about the Day of Atonement. He said, what I think looking back at that is, it's kind of like paying the minimum on your credit card bill every month. Like, you're just getting by. You're not really ever touching the debt, but you're doing what you need to do to just get through. And that's what we think of when we think of the sacrifices that priests were making every single day on behalf of people, and then this yearly thing. It just wasn't enough. And so enter Jesus. Jesus is the one who changed the whole thing. And he instituted the new covenant, because the old one just was never going to be quite enough to get us to where we needed to be. And Matthew 27, this is the very end of Jesus' life. It says, Jesus shouted out again, he's on the cross, and he released his spirit. At that moment, the curtain in the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, rocks split apart, and tombs opened. The bodies of many godly men and women who had died were raised from the dead. They left the cemetery after Jesus' resurrection, went into the holy city of Jerusalem, and appeared to many people, which must have been super freaky. That's a haunted house right there. Like, oh, I thought you died last week. What are you doing? The Roman officer and the other soldiers, and I guess they died again. I mean, it's just intriguing. Sometimes I think about things, I'm like, I wonder how long they lived after that. Or it was just a show of God's power and life. The Roman officer and the other soldiers at the crucifixion were terrified by the earthquake and all that had happened. They said, this man truly was the Son of God. And anybody who was in or near the temple, I can guarantee you, were a little astonished. Because when we talk about the curtain that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, we're talking about a 60-foot tall curtain. Okay, do not imagine your bath curtain. Now, when I was trying to come up with an image for this, I was so frustrated because all of them looked like I'd gone back and taken that tablecloth and ripped it. There were all these like shreds coming from the ends. Like, that is not what that curtain would have looked like when it was split from top to bottom. Scholars think that thing was 4 inches thick of heavy, weighty material. I guarantee you, once that thing went up, nobody got up there 60 feet tall and did anything, messed around with that thing. It was not just going to crumble. It's not like picking up a sheet of paper and tearing it in half. This thing was massive. To have been around and hear or see that thing split in half would have been crazy. And what it symbolized was the old is gone. You don't need to make sacrifices anymore. You don't need to have priests anymore mediate between you and God. Jesus went into the Holy of Holies for real, not just the one in the temple, and paid everything all at once. And so the debt is paid completely. It's not just the minimum. It's all of it. And it's all of it that you haven't even seen yet or done yet. It's all of it for everybody who will ever live in the future and for all of their sins, because God's not limited by time. So on the cross, Jesus took on all of the past and all of the future and all of the present, took on all of the sin and paid for all of it. And when he did that, he said, this is a new thing now. All that you saw before was just a shadow. And the coolest place that we see this in the book of Hebrews, whoever the writer was, she was a genius. I'm just saying. Some people think it was Priscilla, but it could have been Apollos, or probably not Paul. This is nothing like Paul's other writings, but whoever wrote this book and had some reason to not mention her name, was a genius. I mean, the way this writer draws out the covenants, you don't see writing like this anywhere else in the New Testament. The points are, Jesus went into the real Holy of Holies and instituted a real tabernacle where God's presence resides, and that's in us. Jesus was the only sacrifice that ever needs to be made again, once and for all. And Jesus is the only high priest we will ever need again. And he has already done what they needed this guy to do over and over and over again. And besides, he wasn't even perfect. Neither were all those sacrifices that were supposed to be blameless and without blemish. Jesus was the only one that would ever be that. So I just want to read through some portions of Hebrews just to remind us the God who wants to make a covenant with us, who has entered into covenant with us. We take him for granted so often, don't we? Oh, yeah, God, should probably spend time with him today. Yeah, he kind of wants me to do some stuff, but that's going to cost me. What's it going to cost me? Convenience, sleep, a little bit of laziness here and there, a little bit of holiness here and there. I mean, you were talking about God who went out of his way to initiate a covenant with us. And sometimes I find it just really helpful to remind myself, he is the king of everything. I can't say the world, I can't say the universe, because we don't know how many galaxies are out there that he's created and beyond that. However big he is the king of, it's a whole lot bigger than me and my problems and my issues and my frustrations this week. Hebrews 9:1, it says that first covenant between God and Israel had regulations for worship and a place of worship here on earth. He starts off by talking about the first covenant, and then he talks about the holy place, goes to verse 6. When these things were all in place, the priests regularly entered the first room, as they performed their religious duties, the holy place. But only the high priest ever entered the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies, and only once a year. And he always offered blood for his own sins. Think about that. This high priest had to actually offer something for his sins too, which Jesus would never have to do. And for the sins of the people, the sins the people had committed in ignorance. By these regulations, the Holy Spirit revealed that the entrance to the most holy place was not freely open as long as the tabernacle and the system it represented were still in use. As long as that old covenant is in place, there's not access to God the way he's always dreamed and wanted his people to have access. This is an illustration pointing to the present time. For the gifts and sacrifices that priests offer are not able to cleanse the consciences of the people who bring them. For that old system deals only with food and drink and various cleansing ceremonies, physical regulations that were in effect only until a better system could be established. So Christ has now become the high priest forever over all the good things that have come. He has entered that greater, more perfect tabernacle in heaven, which was not made by human hands and is not part of this created world. With his own blood, not the blood of goats and calves, he entered the most holy place once for all time and secured our redemption forever. Under the old system, the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer could cleanse people's bodies from ceremonial impurity. Just think how much more the blood of Christ will purify our consciences from sinful deeds so that we can worship the living God. For by the power of the eternal Spirit, Christ offered himself to God as a perfect sacrifice for our sins. That is why he is the one who mediates a new covenant between God and his people, so that all who are called can receive the eternal inheritance God has promised them. For Christ died to set them free from the penalty of the sins they had committed under the first covenant. He came to set us free from the things that we actually did do. He came to release us from shame about things that we have no control over. He saw us in our weakness, and yet with the image of himself on us. He saw how every time we pull away from that image, which is what we always want to do. We always want to do this stuff on our own. We always want to push him away. We always say, Paul says this in Romans, what I think I should do, I don't do, and what I do, I shouldn't do. It's this constant struggle of humanity. Why don't I just go to him? I don't know. I'm stupid. I'm human. I'm so fallible. Why does he even want to be in covenant with us? I have no idea. I'm still trying to figure out how he loves us so well when we are the only ones who ever walk away from our commitment to our covenant partner, when he never has, he never will. Now, sometimes he asks stuff of us that we just don't like, but we don't get the right to say no. If we want him, we take it all. There's a cost to it. There's a struggle to it. There's supposed to be a cost to it and a struggle to it, or it means nothing. He knows that. And we buck against it. We cry about it. Like my 3-year-old. But I want. He's wailing in the corner. But I want. I'm looking at him like, I just sit down on the floor with you and cry too. Because I do this to God all the time. But God, I want. And he's like, you have no idea what you're asking for. You have no idea what I have for you. Could you just trust that the God who knows everything could maybe know a little bit better than you? I feel like I want to say that to Chase all the time, and I'm not that much smarter than him. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about God and us. When he's our partner, he gets whatever he wants. And here's the thing. We take our heifers, our freedoms, our rights, our junk, our impurity, our crap, Stuff that means nothing, that's worth nothing. But it means something to us because it's what we've relied on for so long. It's what we've run to for so long. It's what we escaped to for so long that to us, we're so afraid to let it go. We bring it, we slice it head to toe, we lay it open, we walk to the other side and we realize, oh wait, this is so much better. The stuff you're giving me is so much better than what I just gave up. And then the next day we forget that and we do the same thing again. And the beautiful thing is, all he wants is us. The reason he sent Jesus and he did all of this and he hung on a cross and said, thank God it's finished. We have done it, God. We have just instituted this brand new thing that now goes all the way back and all the way forward and all the way around. That they can now come to you without anybody in between, without any kind of sacrifice. Because I now am doing it for all of them for all time. They don't owe you anything else. Because of all that, he did all of that. Talk about initiating a covenant. He did all that just to know us. Just to have us. Just so that I will come to him as his little daughter and sit before him and say, tell me something cool, Daddy. Teach me something. Remind me who I am again today. I think I forgot. Can I just sit with you and be with you and let some part of you rub off on me? That's why he did all of this. It's not so that we'll be perfect. It's not so that we'll feel bad about ourselves. It's not so that we'll never have fun again. It's because he just wants to be with us. He loves us for some reason. that only he will ever be able to comprehend. He loves us. He wants us. He values us. He takes pleasure in us. In Leviticus 26:12, all the way back, he says this. He gives all these laws, and it's so easy to miss this stuff because Leviticus is a book of laws, and they get really in-depth. And if you start out at the beginning of the year reading the Bible through in a year, you will get snagged in Leviticus. If you don't Leviticus, it'll be Numbers, and it'll kill you. So just start in the New Testament. Next year, if you want to start, or go to Genesis and skip for a bunch and come back to it. But these are the jewels that we miss because we're like, another law about goats or clothing. I will walk among you. I will be your God, and you will be my people. That's God's heart. That's even the reason for all the laws that he instituted way back then. I just want to be with you. You're going to have to remove all the sin for me to be with you. And they couldn't do it. So Jesus came and did it for us. That is the new covenant. That's the reason that we're here. It's the reason that we do any of this, right? Because there's a really awesome God who wants to spend time with us. And I don't want to put shame and guilt on us when we're like, la, 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 but I do want to kind of kick us in the butt. You know what I'm saying? Like one day we'll be like, why didn't I take advantage of that? Why didn't I appreciate more that I had a covenant partner who was awesome? And there will never, ever be another like him. And I have nothing to offer him, and yet he's entered into this with me. So as always, we're asking, what is God saying to me? What am I going to do about it? The point of this whole thing, the point of the old covenant, the point of the new covenant is that two people created in God's image, imprint, given covenant relationship with him where he walked in the garden with them, and given dominion, kingdom rule over everything, responsibility, work, which is good. All of that was before the fall because those two people said, that fruit looks good. I think it'll teach us some stuff God can't really show us. And we have been trying to get back to that garden ever since. And the only way to do it is to rest in, lean in the covenant that Jesus has given us. One day we'll be there for real, perfectly. My favorite part about heaven is that I will no longer sin. I will not be able to grieve God. I will never repent again. That's crazy. I won't have to. Because I'll know him so well that it would be absolutely ridiculous. But so did Adam and Eve. And I don't know. Sometimes people look at them and they're like, Eve, Adam. I mean, Adam was standing right there. I don't know how people come right there. When they decided to do that, like Adam and Eve, it's like, how long do you think that would have gone? If they hadn't messed up, the next ones would have. You know what I'm saying? Somewhere along the way, we were going to find a way to prioritize what's better for us than to be obedient to what God said. And we're trying, the rest of humanity has been trying to get back. And the thing is, through kingdom work and doing, we're never going to get back there. It's just by being in Jesus, we get back there. Jesus, you're amazing. You're pretty awesome. I am always astonished at the love that you have for us, the pure love. It's not just that you have love, it's that you are love. It's that everything we know about love could be set side by side with you and would still be imperfect compared to you as love, because that's what you are. You are truth. You are justice. You are mercy. You are all those things. We're not judging you compared to what we know about those things. You are those things. You set the standard for what it looks like. And everything we've ever seen about love and about covenant and about commitment is a shadow. It cannot even compare to you and what you have. You are so other than us that when I even try to explain what a covenant with you looks like, I can't even imagine what was in your head, God, as you said, let me try to teach these people how to treat each other and how to treat me by doing something so human. It even as human as becoming a fire pot and a blazing torch. It's not human, but it was the closest you could get. And your majesty and your power and your love and your perfection to actually kind of come down to earth and make a covenant with a man and his people. And then to start all that over again in Jesus. And I forget daily. I forget the God that I serve. I forget that this unbelievable King is waiting for me to turn my attention away from things that will never matter in eternity and sit with you, be with you, abide in you. Be reminded of who I am. That to the world I am really not much, but to you I am everything because I'm yours. So tonight again we just say, God, you're awesome and we're yours. I'm just going to ask you to keep your head bowed, your eyes closed. Lennon, you can go ahead and turn the lights down. Nobody's looking around but me. And I just want to give opportunity, if there's anyone who's here tonight, you say, I don't really know that I've entered a covenant. Maybe I've been around churchy stuff and I've heard about God, but I don't know that I've taken that step to say, let me go find the most important thing in my life and sacrifice it to be able to be in relationship with this God. If you want to take that step tonight, I'm going to ask you, just lift up your face and make eye contact with me so that I know who you are. I can be praying for you, encouraging you. I thank you, Lord, that you have instituted a covenant with us, that you initiated it, that you keep it going, that you're always the one extending grace and patience. And tonight, Lord, as we just lean into this time of prayer, I pray that you would help us remember who you are and who we are in relation to you, that we are so important to you that you have made covenant with us.